didn't have to put it on, you pull apart at the bottom, bring it over your head, pull the strap around your back, slip it onto the metal D-ring in the front. So I'll demonstrate that for you now. And also, it is pretty windy up here today, so just do your best to hold on to any loose items. We do have restrooms on board. They're on the first deck towards the back of the boat. We also have the concession stand on the first deck. We sell things like pretzels, popcorn, hot dogs, nachos, bottled water, a bunch of different sodas, frozen strawberry slushies, and a full bar. Down there working you will find Darren. Behind me driving is Captain Mike, and my name is Addison. I'll be your tour guide today. So this first section of the river that we're about to enter is known as Millionaire's Row, or Millionaire's Colony. Around the turn of the 20th century, this area started to gain a lot of publicity. Millionaires flocked to the region, purchased these islands, and built 30 to 50 room summer mansions on them. So I'll do my best to point out as many of these as I can to you today. So now we're approaching the very first island of the tour. It's off to the left-hand side, and this is known as Cherry Island. And the name of that first home is the Twin Pine Treehouse. It gets the name Twin Pine because originally there was an identical home that stood right next to it, but they were too close together and deemed to be a fire hazard, so the other one was torn down. That foundation is still used as the in-ground swimming pool today. And these twin homes were built by business partners Nathan Strauss and Abraham Abrams. They were the co-founders of the A&S department stores, which is now modern-day Macy's. This second home on Cherry Island is known as Casablanca. It's a Spanish name meaning White House. We're very creative with our names out here. And this was built in 1892 by a Cuban sugar plantation owner named Louis Marx. It's owned today by the Amsterdam family. They're actually local to the area, and they do rent it out for $4,500 a night. As we pass by Casablanca, notice this strange seawall along the waterline. It features lions, dragons, and gargoyles. This was constructed during the Prohibition era, and these statues were meant to fend off evil alcohol spirits from Canada. In actuality, though, if you see those white keyholes, those were used for oil lanterns. Different patterns would signal Canadians that it was safe to cross the river with the alcohol. This next larger structure on the shoreline is just a boathouse, but just past that is the last home on Cherry Island. This one's known as Windley Lodge. And this was built in 1913 by Frederick and Nellie Fraser out of Solvay, New York. They chose this location because of the easy access to their favorite golf course, which is the Thousand Islands Country Club. It's directly across the river from here, and we'll pass by it later, so I'll be sure to point it out. And at one point, Windley Lodge was actually owned by the Kellogg family, and that's the same Kellogg as in Kellogg cereal. So now we're beginning to turn, and in just a few moments on our right-hand side, a large rock will come into view. This is known as Devil's Oven, and it's famous for being the hiding place of Canadian river pirate Bill Johnston. So as we pass by and look along the shoreline, you might be able to spot a small cave. It leads 30 feet under the surface of the island. So Bill Johnston was famous for the Patriots War of 1837, during which time he sank the British mail steamer, the Sir Robert Peel. After sinking the ship, he retreated to this island and hid in this cave for 3 days and 3 nights. He was eventually tracked by authorities who followed his daughter Kate, who was bringing him supplies, and he was then tried, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison for the crime of treason. He only served 2 short years of that sentence, however. He was granted a special pardon under the condition he become the first caretaker of the Rock Island Lighthouse. That's about 5 miles up the river from here, in Fisher's Landing, New York. So Bill Johnston then served the rest of his life there, dying at the age of 83 in 1870. Off to our left-hand side, this skinnier island is known as Cuba Island, simply because from an aerial view it resembles the island nation of Cuba. And coming up on our right hand side is Wheeler Island, also known as Walmanet. This first structure is a newly constructed boathouse. This was just finished last season. The home we see on Walmanet today is not the original structure. It's built up on the foundation of what was the Walmanet Inn. And the Walmanet Inn was a famous motel and restaurant in the area that was lost to fire during the 1970s. And a motel is just like any other hotel, motel, Holiday Inn, but it's only accessible by boat. All this land over to our left-hand side is U.S. mainland, more specifically Key Wade State Park, which was constructed in the early 1900s and is now the headquarters for all 26 state parks in the Thousand Isles region. It's still used as a campsite and marina today. And this seawall on the waterline and the gazebo much farther ahead of us on the left-hand side, those are still the original structures from 1905. Coming up in just a few moments on our right hand side, this is Comfort Island. It's the only island out here I've ever seen black bears on. If you look along the shoreline, you might see some waving at us, along with the rooftop. Unfortunately, just statues. But that home you see on top of Comfort Island is known as Comfort Lodge. And this was built by the Clark family out of Santa Barbara, California, and they named it Comfort Lodge in honor of their daughter, who sadly passed away at the age of 10 from diphtheria. And as we pass by, try to notice that strange walkway along the top of Comfort Lodge. That's known as Widow's Walk or Widow's Wash. And that's because wives would gather here to wait for their husbands to return home from sea. You can see about 4 miles down the river from up there. And as we continue passing by Comfort Island, another home becomes visible on the foot of the island. This one's known as the Mobbin Lodge, and it was built by a man named James Holyfield. He was a very superstitious stockbroker in New York City, and he was so superstitious that he had the corners of his living room rounded out. That's where he believed his mind to be most special, and he wanted to prevent the devil from catching him in a corner. Now off to our left, this is that Key Wade marina I previously mentioned. It's a very popular marina in the area, probably because of the easy access to the main shipping channel, along with this large break wall that prevents the boats from being damaged by any wake or waves. And it's so popular here that to get a dog slip for a season, it's about a 3 to 5 year wait list. As we begin to turn, off on the left-hand side, another island will become visible. This one's known as Artificial Island. It gets the name artificial because it is man-made, and today it's for sale for just under $4 million. Artificial Island was constructed by Mr. Hudson P. Rose as a gift to his wife, Mrs. Rose. So he had told Mrs. Rose she could have any island in the region that she pleased, but after a long time searching, she couldn't find one that she liked. At that time, Mr. Rose took it upon himself to construct Artificial and present it to her on their anniversary. But at that time, Mrs. Rose decided she didn't really like the island, didn't like the river, and didn't even like Mr. Rose, so she left all three. Now as we turn off in the distance behind us, you can see the first span of the Thousand Isles Bridge system that connects U.S. mainland on the left to Wellesley Island on the right. It's eventually followed by 4 more spans, making a total distance of 7 miles out to Canadian mainland. And Wellesley Island is the second largest island in the entire Thousand Isles region. It's about 9 miles long and 4 miles wide, and that makes it the largest American island. And now as we fully turn, we're traveling through what's known as the main shipping channel of the St. Lawrence Seaway. So the St. Lawrence Seaway is the largest and longest freshwater inland navigable waterway in the entire United States. It spans 2,342 miles all the way from the tip of the Great Lakes at Duluth, Minnesota, out to the Atlantic Ocean. This particular section is known as the American Narrows, and that's because it's the narrowest portion of the entire seaway. That produces a very strong current in this area. And there are two types of ships you see traveling in the seaway. The first one, it's Lakers. They're much longer, about 650 to 750 feet on average. They have much more rounded bows as well. That's because they strictly travel within the St. Lawrence Seaway. The second type of ships are Salties. They're much shorter, about 450 feet, and they have more pointy bows. That's because they traverse harsher ocean waters as well. And anytime you're traveling in the main shipping channel, you're guaranteed a water depth of 27 feet and enough width for two ships to pass by each other. And that brings me to this island over on our right hand side. This is Stony Crest or Jewel Island, and it used to be home to the Stony Crest Mansion. When they were constructing the main shipping channel, there wasn't enough space in this section. So a large portion of this island was blown off with dynamite, and in the process a 30 rooms of our mansion was torn down. So speaking of these large ships, we're actually very close to one right now. Unfortunately, it rests about 200 feet below us at the bottom of the St. Lawrence River. The Roy A. Jodrey sank here on November 21st, 1974 during a blinding snowstorm when it struck Pullman Shoal. That collision tore a 75-foot hole in the bottom of the ship, so as you can imagine, it took on water very quickly. The crew made their best efforts to pump out that water, but found themselves to be unsuccessful. Fortunately, they sank just ahead of us, directly across from the US Coast Guard station, so they were able to just swim to shore and watch the ship sink with the lights still on. So no lives were lost during the original sinking of the Jodrey, but the next day 3 divers went down to review the damage. As I mentioned, there's a very strong current in this portion of the river. One of the safety lines snapped and only 2 divers were able to return to the surface. The body of the 3rd diver was never recovered, and the Jodrey actually remains a dive site today, but is strictly reserved for the most elite of divers and classified as a level 5 master dive site. This beautiful home coming up on our left-hand side is known as Hopewell Hall, and this sits on Wellesley Island. This was built by Mr. George Boldt as a wedding present for his granddaughter Clover Boldt. It recently sold again in 2021 for $3.7 million to the grandson of E.J. Noble. E.J. Noble is the inventor of the Lifesaver candy. Just past Hopewell Hall, we're now approaching Pullman Island. It's also known as Castle Rest, and this was owned by Mr. George Pullman, who was the inventor of the sleeper-style railroad car. In the 1870s, Mr. Pullman actually hosted a week's vacation for the current President of the United States, who was Ulysses S. Grant. And at that time, there were no structures on this island, so the President and company camped out here for a week in tents. That also brought a lot of national media coverage to the area and helped it become as popular as it is today. Further off in the distance on Wellesley Island, that large yellow building is the 1,000 Ounce Country Club I mentioned earlier. It's also a yacht club, and it features 2 separate 18-hole golf courses, a restaurant, and a pool. Staying on the left-hand side, this next island is known as Nobby Island. The home on the back side of this island was constructed in 1870, making one of the oldest still-standing homes here in the region. And as we pass by, notice those stone pillars along the front side of the island. Those are constructed of pink Laurentian granite that was drawn up directly from the bottom of the St. Lawrence River. What's so unusual about them is that they're solely supported by the weight of the second and third stories of the home. And still on the left-hand side, we're now closely passing by Friendly Island, also known as Dewey Island. The original owner of Friendly Island was Paul Quackenbush, who was also the owner of Empire Airlines. His grandfather invented the nutcracker and the air rifle, or the double-hinge nutcracker, sorry. But he sold the patent for the air rifle to the Daisy Corporation, who still produces the Daisy Red Ryder BB gun today. Some people say this island's so friendly that if you wave at it, that white fence will wave right back at you. Sorry guys, that joke's so bad you could even call it offensive. They don't get better from here, sorry. So just past Friendly Island, we're now approaching St. Elmo Island. St. Elmo is the patron saint of all sailors, and that large white anchor in the front lawn commemorates all the men and women who have lost their lives out here on the river. Unfortunately, the original home was lost to fire in the 1950s, so that home you see atop the hill today is just a replica. But as we continue on, that boathouse on the shoreline is still the original structure from the late 1800s. And just behind St. Elmo Island, that large white and brown building, that rests on Wellesley Island, and that's known as the Swiss Chalet. That was also built by George Boldt, and he used it to house all the Swiss architects and engineers that he brought in to oversee the construction of Boldt Castle. It's still used as a condominium today. These next three islands on the left are known as Florence, Belle, and Imperial Island, and that marks the end of the Van Nuys Row section. So now we're approaching what many people consider to be the highlight of any tour in the Thousand Islands, and that's Boldt Castle, located on Hart Island. This was constructed by Mr. George Boldt from the years of 1899 to 1904, and Mr. Boldt was a Prussian immigrant who came over here by himself at the age of 13 years old. He was originally a chicken farmer, but he landed in New York City, so not much chicken farming to do there. He then took a job as a dishwasher at a local hotel. He worked hard for many years, worked his way up in the hotel industry, and found himself in a very powerful management position. And at that time, he was approached by a group of investors looking for him to manage their new hotel, which was the Waldorf Astoria. So George gratefully accepted the offer and actually fell in love with one of the investors' daughters, Louise, and that's who he constructed this castle for. And it's actually rumored that Mr. Boldt had a second love of his life, his mother-in-law. So when Louise informed him that she was coming to live with them, he said there simply isn't enough room in the 6-story castle. He purchased this smaller island off to the left-hand side, built that brown cottage, and presented it to his mother-in-law. That island is known as Just Room Enough today. So as we now approach Hart Island, the first structure you'll see is the Arch of Honor. That served as the official meeting place for George Boldt to greet any guests he had to the island, and also symbolizes his triumph over poverty. Just past that is the Ulster Tower, formerly known as the Children's Playhouse. Inside is a 2-lane bowling alley, library, billiard room, kitchen, and even a small theater. And that's the only structure that the Boldt family ever actually lived in on the island. It served as temporary living quarters during the construction of the main castle. The castle sits 6 stories high with 122 rooms, 45 fireplaces, and 365 windows. The upper levels have rooms for guests, and the second-level suites were reserved for the Boldt family. Inside is also a ballroom, dining room, in-ground swimming pool, and the first elevator ever constructed north of New York City. On that lower terrace beside the castle, you can now see the Italian Gardens. That's a very popular summertime wedding location, and they host over 100 weddings here every single summer. In this last structure we'll see on Hart Island, that's the powerhouse and pump house. It used to hold 2 coal-fired generators and pumping equipment used to supply the rest of the island of water and electricity. In 1939, however, it was struck by a stray firework, so since then it's been fully reconstructed. And they still host fireworks shows on the island, but they preemptively go out and spray all the roofs of these buildings just to ensure that doesn't happen again. And as we pass by, we can see the full yacht house in the distance on Wellesley Island. That's where George Boldt would have stored his entire fleet of ships. So as I mentioned, Mr. Boldt built this castle for the love of his life, Louise. He acquired this island from a senator by the name of E.K. Hart, who had named it after himself, spelled H-A-R-T. So after buying the island, he changed the spelling to H-E-A-R-T, and blew off parts of the island with dynamite to form the shape of a Valentine's Day heart. In 1904, however, around the 95% completion point of the castle, Louise fell ill and passed away to a form of tuberculosis. So Mr. Boldt was devastated. He sent a telegram to the island telling all workers to lay down their tools, stop all work, and leave everything as is. They all obeyed, and the castle was left to lay abandoned for over 70 years. It fell into pretty rough shape, but in 1977 it was purchased by the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority for a grand total of $1 US. With that purchase, however, there were two conditions. It can never go past that 95% completion point because Louise never got to see it fully finished, and every dollar made in the island must go directly back into the restoration of the castle. They still own it today. They're the ones that have restored it to the point it's at now, and they continue to put over $1 million into it every single year. All of these smaller islands on the left-hand side form what's known as the Manhattan Island Group. Since there are so many islands out here, 1,864 to be exact, they're pretty hard to locate. So when there are a bunch of smaller islands in one area, they'll often group them together based on the name of the largest island. So that largest island with the white home is known as Manhattan Island. And this area was actually originally used as a base for marine research. So as we pass by Manhattan Island, a much smaller island with a brown cottage and a green roof comes into view. That's known as Coyote or Tugboat Island, and that's owned by a local man by the name of Bruce Carhart. So Mr. Carhart spent his career working for Ray-Ban sunglasses, and he actually designed some of their most popular frames in the 1980s. Upon retirement, he retreated to this area just to enjoy the river and his favorite hobby of fishing, but he found that he continued to lose pairs of Ray-Bans into the river every single summer. So at that point, he took it upon himself to start his very own eyewear company known as Coyote Eyewear, and he invented the world's first floating polarized sunglasses, which are called Bobs. We actually have 2 pairs of these on board today. They're on the first deck, so if anybody would like to check them out, please feel free to do so. And staying on Coyote Island, that home on top of the island, that was constructed on the mainland, and then in the wintertime it was pulled across the ice by skis. That's actually a surprisingly pretty common practice. It can be much more affordable to do it that way, rather than pay for a barge to bring over workers and equipment. That larger island just past Coyote on the left-hand side, that's known as Steamboat. So before the main shipping channel was constructed, steamboats would frequently come through the area carrying all types of cargo, and this island was used as a fueling stop. You can see that building with the cone-shaped roof, that was a lending library, so sailors could come in, drop off books they'd already read, pick up books left by other sailors. So at this point in the narration, I've been talking since we left the dock, so I'm going to take my first and only break in the tour today. Now's a great time to get out of the sun, stretch your legs, and visit the concession stand, and I'll pick back up in just a few moments. Thank you.